Okay, so we want to correct the motion that is in the EPI Rep 1 and Rep 2, and previously mentioned SPM will do it first with an inter-session alignment, aligning the first volumes together, and then intra-session alignment, which is aligning all the other volumes to the first volume of each respective session. And how do we do that? How do we get SPM to do this now? All right. So the motion correction tool is located here in the menu, and we notice there is the estimate, and reslice options, and then the realign and unwarped. As we talked about in class, because we do not have the unwarping gradient field images, so we're going to ignore that for the purposes of this course. We're going to focus on estimate, reslice, and estimate and reslice. What estimate does is that it will actually do a kind of a comparison, right, between each of the EPI volumes and to kind of estimate, hence the name, how far each volume has been moved compared to the first volume, all right? And so it will get an estimate of how much it needs to correct in order to bring the volume back to the original position. And we talked about it. There are 6 parameters. We talked about it in class. There's XYZ translation and XYZ rotation. So the estimate step will allow SPM, when you use it, SPM will then estimate the values for each of these 6 parameters of translation, rotation, XYZ direction that it needs to apply in order to move the EPI image back to the original or desired position. But it won't actually apply it. It will just estimate it, and then it will write it into the EPI header. So bear in mind, when you run the estimate step in SPM, it will change the file in the header, but it won't change the file name. So if you run it, and then you don't notice it, and then you think like the next time because it's the same file, and then you run it again because you forgot that you ran it before, that would be a big error because it's already been estimated, and then when you run it again, it will re-estimate it again, and then that might have the potential of messing things up. So it's important that you realize that when you run an estimate and the name doesn't change, that doesn't mean the file is the same, all right? You will see that the modification date time of the file would have been updated, but the file name remains the same. What's happened is that SPM has written some new information into the header section. All right, but it doesn't change the image data itself. So that's the estimate step. Now the reslice step will actually apply the estimated parameters and actually change the data, and this will yield a new image with a new file name, I think with the R prefixed in front. So this one will be pretty obvious. It will generate a new EPI image that has been adjusted according to the estimated parameters. So you can either do estimate alone, or if you've already estimated things, you can just do the reslice alone. But you can definitely do both in one step. And that's what we're going to do here in this tutorial. So we're just going to go ahead and click Realign, Estimate, and Reslice. And the batch window should appear for you to set your parameters for motion correction. And the way to orientate you here is that here are the modules that will be run in this batch. And here is a Realign, Estimate, and Reslice. And you'll notice that there is an X here, which means you need to fill this in for it to be able for you to run it. Okay? And as we went through in class, it's asking you here, there's an X for data, which means it needs you to tell it what EPI runs do you want it to do motion correction for, right? So we have 2 sessions, Rep 1 and Rep 2. So here at the bottom, we're going to tell SPM to, in the data field, to create 2 sessions. So one session, if you click it once, you'll see that this session appears with a new X here. And we have 2 sessions, so we're going to have another new session. Click it again. And then there'll be 2 sessions with 2 X's. And here's where we want to, if you go ahead and click the session, it will ask you to specify the data that you want to enter into the session. Now, as we said before in class also, SPM has very nice help documentation at the bottom of each of the selections. So when you have the time, it really will pay off if you do take the time to read it in detail. So for now, we're going to select the session 1 data, which is the rep 1 EPI. And that's what we're going to click on specify here. And then the window will appear. And then you're going to go to the subject nifty folder. And in this case, we're going to use the frame now. We're going to say, I want to do motion correction on frames 1, volume 1 to 150 of the series 23, rep 1, subject Y01, rep 1, series 23. Now the trick here is not to click anything at the moment. You've highlighted volume 1, and you want to scroll down all the way to volume 153. Don't click anything, and just kind of place your cursor on volume 23, and then hold your shift button on your keyboard down, and then click. Make sure you're placed in the right location, and then go ahead and click that last file, that 150 there. And you'll see that it will have selected 150 files, and these are the for series 23 of subject 1, rep 1, 1 to 150. And you're done. Go ahead and click done. And so now you've told SPM that session 1 is going to be this series of EPI images, all right? 150 files of them, which means 150 time points. Then we're going to go ahead and select the rep 2 for session 2. And it's a similar process, but now we're gonna also specify 1 to 150, but now we're going to use series 25, okay? So this is a bit of a tricky situation here. What you want to do is you want to click on the first volume of the series 25, and it will disappear and highlight volume 2. But you don't want to click on anything else, but you just want to scroll down to 150, and again hold shift and then click the 150th volume, and it will have selected 150 files for series 25, volume 1 to 150, and then you're done. So at the end, you should have session 1 and session 2 filled with the corresponding rep 1 and rep 2 volumes. You can always check by looking at this window at the bottom and then clicking if you selected the correct files. If you've done it wrong, it's okay to go ahead and click specify and start fresh in the selection windows. Okay. The other thing to change here is this field here. It says in this number of passes, what it wants you to select here is whether you want to co-register or kind of correct the motion to the mean EPI image of the 2 sessions, or do you want to do it to the first EPI image? As we said earlier, we want in this course, in this tutorial, we will do register to first, because the first EPI image of the first session is the one that's closest to the T2. And so if we co-register these together, we will be able to get a good spatial temporal resolution. And some people might advise to register to the mean, and we've discussed this in class, but for the moment of this tutorial, we're just going to stick with the first. And the other thing to note is that it will apply, it says here, it will do a file name prefix, it will apply a R in the resliced files. So you should expect that after it completes its processing, you will have a file that will have the name Y01, rep 1, 150, etc., but it would have an R put in front of it, a new EPI file that will have an R put in front of it. Okay, if we're all good with this, it's a good practice to save this batch setup so that you can remember what you did, and you might even use it again in the future. So I'm just going to save it. And I'm going to put it in the subject, same subject nifty of the same subject folder. Okay, I'm going to put it here, and then I'm going to call it Y01 reslice estimate, sorry, Y01 realign, estimate, and reslice. I'm just going to go save it. And you'll see that this mat file, which is the batch, will be saved in that folder. And you can open again. You can, if you later on, if you decide to, you can click the open button and select that mat file, and it will reload all these settings, and then you can run it again. All right. So I'm not going to do that, but I'm just going to. I know I've saved it, and I can open it again. And now that the play button is green, it means that I can actually run this motion correction. I'm just going to go ahead and run it. And as soon as I click that, you will see that MATLAB is going to go ahead and run the process. It's running a job. And then you'll see the progress bar indications on the left, bottom left panel. And then I'm just going to also call the graphics window out for the moment. Nothing's changed yet from my previous use. But as soon as this completes and it's done its job, you'll see something appear here in the graphics window. It should be coming up right in a moment. And you'll see what happens here is that it will show you the 6 parameters that it has done the estimation for. This is the estimation step. And what SPM has done the estimation for the realign is that you'll see on the x-axis is 300 images. That's the first 150 images for rep 1. And then from 151 to 300 onwards is the other 150 images for rep 2. All right, so there's actually 2 runs here. And you'll also notice that there's a top panel, which is the translation in the XYZ translation directions in millimeters. And then there's also the rotation parameters, which are pitch, roll, and yaw. That's also in the X, Y, and Z direction, but in the rotation kinds of movement. And the units are in degrees here. And also, there's also 300 images here. So these are all matched in time, okay? What's important is that you'll notice for this subject that there is indeed, if you look at the blue line here for the pitch, which is the X direction, yes, indeed, as we saw before using check reg, right? The subject was kind of tilting his or her nose up over time in the first run. And it looks like he or she did the same thing also in the second run, all right? And then also, another thing to note is that there seemed to be some sort of a jump in here right at the 150 line time point. This is normal because remember, this is subjects run 1, rep 1, and this is rep 2. So in between runs, it's kind of expected that there will be a big jump between the first volumes of the 2 sessions or the 2 runs. That's what the inter-session alignment does, right? It first corrects the first volumes of all the other sessions to the first volume of the first run, as we have said it. And then it will do the intra-session alignment, which is then all these fuzzy lines, it will bring it to the space of the first volume. And then correspondingly for the rep 2 as well, all right? Now the important thing is that we know that our EPI resolution, the voxel size, is about 3.4 millimeters at the smallest dimension. So strictly speaking, our criteria should be that if any subject moves more than the size of one voxel, which is 3.4 millimeters, then usually we would be very cautious about using that data, and we might consider to discard that subject's functional data. All right, and we will discuss this in class about some various criteria about how to discard or whether to discard or not. But that's the standard. So just by looking here, we can see this subject is okay. There's a big movement here in terms of the inter-session scans. But within session, this subject hardly moved more than 2 millimeters or so. So I'd say this is okay. Even in terms of the degrees, you can see that although it went from 0 to 4 degrees, we generally use the same kind of number in millimeters as well as degrees. So if it's 3.4 millimeters of movement for translation, we also use like the similar 3.4 degrees of rotation. But in this case, although it went from 0 to 4 degrees of rotation, that's when you take 2 sessions together. But if you look at just one session, it was well within maybe 3.5 or 3.4. So it's more or less acceptable. It's really not too bad. And maybe actually 2.4, 2.5 or something of degrees of rotation. So overall, this subject should be okay. I wouldn't reject this subject. All right, so once this is done, you'll see also go to the file folders and the Finder, and you'll see that indeed it has generated a Y series Y rep 1 series 23 with an R in front and a series 25 rep 2 with an R in front as well. All right. In addition, you will notice that there are 2 text files, an RP TXT for series 23 and series 25. If you go ahead and open this, I'm going to use my Mac here with a text editor or with Excel spreadsheet. You will notice that there are 6 columns in these text files. These text files are the 6 movement parameters that were used to plot these 6 lines. All right, and this series 23 are the numbers used to plot, this first part of it and this first part of it. And then for series 25, also six columns, and that's used to plot this second half of the graph. So these are the actual estimated numbers that were used to plot this and used to adjust the brain images. And these text files, we want to keep these. These are very important because we will use them again as regressors of motion later on in the statistical analysis step. Last but not least, you will notice that there is a mean EPI image. And in general, for now for this course, we're not going to worry too much about it. But it is literally the average of all the volumes of the functional images in the data. All right. Okay, and the last thing we can do now is that might help would be, now that we've applied motion correction, we want to do some checking to see if it worked. So one thing we can do is to use check reg again. And in this case, instead of opening the original image, which we remember for rep 1 had a kind of a tilt upwards, right? So we're going to do the same thing now, but for the resliced image, the one with the R in front. Again, remember, we are going to remove the frame reference. We're going to just use the whole 4D volume. And we're going to see now if the movement, it won't be perfect, but it should be reduced. You can see, just look closely at the sagittal to see if there is any, if the movement is as drastic as before. And you can see, no, not as drastic as before. If you don't believe me, go ahead and open the original Series 23 and compare these two movies. And you'll see that, yes, the motion correction reslice has done its job here.